Okay, so for this deep dive, you brought us Romeo and Juliet. I mean, talk about a classic.
A true
We're
cornerstone.
talking late 1500s, and it's
Still
still,
so relevant.
like, yeah, all over the place, constantly being
Uh,
reformed.
Absolutely.
So our mission, if you choose to accept it, is to figure out why, right? Not
Hmm.
just the plot, but why these, what do they call, star-crossed lovers,
Star-crossed.
why they still kind of grab us, all these centuries later. And you brought some amazing sources to help us unpack all this.
Well, hopefully we can do them justice.
Absolutely. So it's more than just a sad love story, right? I mean, Romeo and Juliet, it feels like it gets at something really basic about being human,
And
right?
it really does. It holds up a mirror to some of our most, I guess, primal emotions and experiences. And yeah, I think a great place to start is with that big one that just overwhelms everything.
Yeah.
Love.
Okay, so love, but what's so cool about this play is how many different kinds of love Shakespeare throws at us.
Mm.
Obviously, the big one, Romeo and Juliet, this huge, passionate, all-consuming.
It's almost like a supernova.
Yeah, it's just explodes.
It's immediate.
But it's so different from what people were supposed to do back then, like in Elizabethan England.
Right.
The whole courtship thing was way more formal, way more drawn out.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe part of what makes their story so powerful and tragic, that feeling of, being swept away.
It's almost as if that impulsiveness is key to their fate.
Right. And you see that right away, like Romeo's all mopey about Rose Lane 1 minute and then gone. He sees Juliet and it's like, the world changes in a snap.
Love at first sight doesn't even really cover it.
Right. This wasn't exactly the Elizabethan way to find a spouse. But then you have Paris, who's after Juliet too, but it's a whole different ballgame with him.
Oh, completely different. His pursuit is much more about duty, about, I guess, climbing the social ladder. Marriage for him isn't about this grand passion. It's about, solidifying his position.
Tactical.
Very practical.
And that shows us, I think, a side of Elizabethan society that we might forget about. Marriages back then were often about strategy. They were about, families making deals and gaining power or money or whatever.
Alliances, really.
Which makes Romeo and Juliet's love, seem even more intense. They're not playing by the rules. They're just driven by pure emotion.
It's this rebellion almost against the norms.
But it's not all about this grand romance, right? There are other types of love in the play, too. It's not all fireworks.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the nurse and Juliet, for example.
The nurse.
In the middle of all this hate, all this feuding, you have this really strong bond between them. It's almost maternal. She's constantly caring for Juliet, supporting her, giving her advice. She's a confidant, a true ally, especially in this secret romance.
And she's really the one stable, loving presence in Juliet's life, right? I mean, her own family is a mess.
Right. It shows that even within this deeply fractured family, you can still have these genuinely positive relationships.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so let's get to the good stuff now.
The language.
Yeah, some of these incredible lines that show us just how powerful this romantic love is. First, Juliet's realization. She figures out who Romeo is, and she says, "My only love sprung from my only hate. Too early seen unknown, and known too late."
Wow, that line is just, it's the heart of the play right there.
It really is.
Her love, her deepest affection, is for someone her family despises. It's forbidden. And the way she says, too early seen unknown and known too late, it captures that cruel twist of fate so perfectly.
It's like they're doomed from the start.
In a way, they are.
And then there's that famous balcony scene. Romeo sees Juliet and he just bursts out, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun."
It's not just beautiful, it's poetic.
It really is.
He doesn't just say, oh, she's pretty. Juliet is the sun. She illuminates his whole world.
It's like Rosaline never even happened.
Completely forgotten.
And Juliet, she throws it right back at him with, "My bounty is as boundless as the sea. My love is deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have. For both are infinite."
That image of the boundless sea, it's like her love can't be contained. It's endless.
It's almost scary, right? Like, it's too much.
There's a sense of, I guess, inevitability there, too.
And let's not forget, back at the Capulet feast, when Romeo first lays eyes on Juliet, he's just blown away. He says, "Did my heart love till now? Forswear at sight, for I ne'er saw true beauty till this night."
It's instant. He's never felt anything like it.
But it makes you wonder, right? is it really love, or is it this infatuation? I mean, he did the same thing with Rosalind, basically.
It's a good question. How deep can love be if it changes so quickly?
Right. But then their love, it's totally against everything their families, their whole society believes in.
Is radical.
They get married in secret. They put each other before their families, before their names.
They choose love over everything else.
And that was a huge deal back then. And then the big question, is their love ultimately a good thing or a bad thing? They both die, but their families finally make peace because of it.
It's a paradox. Their love is destructive, but it also leads to healing.
We talked about Paris and Lord Capulet and how they see marriage totally differently from Romeo and Juliet.
But it's a business arrangement for them.
And I think even without a specific line, you can see that duty-based love in how they talk about Paris. He's the perfect match, but for all the wrong reasons.
He ticks all the boxes socially and economically.
And the nurse, her love for Juliet, it's always there. You know, like a warm blanket. You don't need a quote to feel it.
It's shown through actions more than words.
But then you have Friar Lawrence. He's the one who marries Romeo and Juliet, and he warns them, these violent delights have violent ends.
Foreshadowing.
Big time. He's basically saying that their passion, even though it's love, it can turn dangerous. It's almost like it's too much for the world to handle.
Shakespeare loves to connect love and violence, doesn't he?
Yeah, and that leads us to some of the criticisms of their love, right? Some people say it's just like teenage hormones, puppy love.
Especially with Romeo switching from Rosaline so fast, it makes you wonder.
Right? Was it really true love? Or was it just, I don't know, a crush?
Infatuation.
Yeah, exactly. But you can't deny that they're challenging the whole system.
Totally.
It's like their love is this huge act of rebellion. They're saying, screw the rules, screw the families, we're doing this our own way.
It's a powerful message, even today.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit now and dive into another big theme that just runs through this whole play. Conflict. It's like everywhere you look, there's some kind of tension. Something's about to explode.
Conflict is the engine of the play, really. And it starts right away with that feud between the Montagues and the Capulets.
Yeah, it's like this constant background noise, this
ancient grudge, right?
Yeah, this ancient grudge that nobody even really remembers why it started.
It just is. And the fact that we don't know the origin makes it even more, I guess, pointless and absurd.
Right. It's just blind hatred passed down through generations.
And that's the point, isn't it? The destructive power of inherited animosity. It's a cycle of violence.
And it's not just this big feud, right? Romeo and Juliet are also fighting with themselves.
Oh, absolutely. Internal conflict is huge here. They're torn, they love each other, but they also feel this loyalty to their families. And once Romeo kills Tybalt, that's when things really get messy inside their heads.
Yeah, like who are they supposed to be loyal to? Who are they even supposed to be anymore?
Their love makes them question everything, their identity, their values.
We also see conflict in their friendships. Romeo and Mercutio, they're best buds, but they have such different views on pretty much everything.
They represent different ways of dealing with the world, right?
And Mercutio's death, it's directly because of this stupid feud.
And it shows how this pressure to be a certain way, to act a certain way, it can push you to do things you wouldn't normally do. Think about how Mercutio reacts when Romeo doesn't want to fight Tybalt.
Yeah, he calls it vile, dishonorable submission. Like Romeo's being a coward.
Right. He's basically forcing Romeo into the fight, which leads to disaster. And then we can't forget Lord Capulet and Juliet. I mean, talk about a power struggle.
Oh, man, he's absolutely determined to marry her off to Paris, no matter what she wants.
That parental pressure is huge. It's what drives Juliet to such extremes.
It really shows the power dynamics of families back then. The father was in charge, and the daughter, she was basically, property. And that lack of choice, that feeling of being trapped, it pushes Juliet to do some pretty crazy things.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's look at some lines that really highlight all this conflict. Starting with Act 1, Scene 1, that whole thumb-biting thing. It's so simple, but it instantly sets the stage for everything that's going to happen.
It's like a spark that ignites the whole powder keg.
And then there's Tybalt. Pure rage. He says, "What, drawn and talk of peace? I hate the word as I hate hell, all Montagues and thee."
He hates the Montagues more than anything, more than hell even.
And that hatred, it consumes him. And Mercutio, as he's dying, he curses both families. A plague of both your houses. It really is. He's not even part of the feud, but he gets caught in the crossfire. And that curse, it kind of hangs over the rest of the play.
It foreshadows more tragedy.
Now, Juliet, when she's on the balcony, she cries out, "Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name."
You can hear her heart break in that line.
She loves Romeo, but his name, his family, it's a barrier.
It's what separates them.
And Lord Capulet, when he finds out Juliet won't marry Paris, he just loses it. Hang the young baggage, disobedient wretch. I mean, talk about harsh.
It's brutal, but it shows how little control Juliet has over her own life.
So conflict, it drives the whole story, right? It's like a chain reaction, and it ends up hurting everybody. And it's not until Romeo and Juliet die that things finally start to change.
It's a tragic resolution.
And it leads to some interesting debates, right? Some people say the feud is the main problem, the root of all the evil.
It's the big, obvious obstacle.
Right, but others say it's more about the internal conflicts, the choices that Romeo and Juliet make.
Are they victims of fate, or are they responsible for their own downfall?
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole idea of, is there even a solution to conflict like this?
The families reconcile, but at a terrible cost.
Exactly. 2 young people are dead. It's like, is that the only way to end hatred? Through more tragedy? And we have to remember that honor and family, they were everything back in Elizabethan England.
They were the most important values.
So it makes sense that the characters act the way they do, right? They're trapped in the system where revenge is expected, where you have to protect your family's name no matter what.
It adds a whole layer of complexity to the story.
Okay, let's move on to another big theme that kind of hangs over everything. Fate.
Right from the beginning, we're told they're star-crossed lovers.
Yeah, that sets the tone right away, doesn't it? Like, we know something bad is going to happen. But it makes you wonder, how much control do they actually have over their own lives?
It's the age-old question, fate versus free will.
And this was a really big deal for Elizabethans, right? They believed in astrology, in destiny, so they would have seen Romeo and Juliet's story as even more, I don't know, inevitable.
Absolutely. The stars were believed to influence everything.
Okay, let's look at some of the lines that really bring this theme to life. Right off the bat, the prologue tells us, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. I mean, talk about blunt.
No subtlety there. We know their fate right away.
And then there's Romeo. Before he even goes to the Capulet feast, he has this bad feeling. He says, I fear too early, for my mind misgives some consequence, yet hanging in the stars shall bitterly begin his fearful date.
It's a premonition. He senses something terrible is about to happen.
And he blames the stars. He thinks it's all out of his control.
Which, in a way, it might be.
And after Tybalt's death, Romeo's totally lost it. He cries out, oh, I'm fortune's fool.
He sees himself as a victim of fate, a pawn in some cosmic game.
He feels powerless. And then Juliet has this vision. She sees Romeo dead. Methinks I see thee, now thou art so low, as one dead in the bottom of a tomb.
Chilling. Right.
It's like she knows what's going to happen, but she can't do anything about it.
The play is full of these moments of foreshadowing.
And then there's that scene where Romeo hears that Juliet's dead, and he yells, then I defy you, stars. But then he goes and kills himself anyway.
It's a brief moment of rebellion, but ultimately he succumbs to what he believes is his destiny.
So fate, it's like this constant presence throughout the play. You always feel like something bad is coming. And even the things that seem like accidents, like the letter that doesn't reach Romeo,
Right.
It's like, maybe that's fate too, messing with their lives.
It's easy to see those coincidences as the hand of fate at work.
And that leads to all sorts of debates, right? Some people say fate is real, that's this force that controls everything.
Like a puppet master.
But then others say, no, it's more about the choices people make, their mistakes.
They argue for free will.
And it all comes back to that question, right? How much control do Romeo and Juliet really have over their lives?
It's the central tension of the play. And Shakespeare uses all this imagery of stars in the heavens to reinforce this idea of fate.
Yeah, it's everywhere. And for Elizabethans, that would have been super powerful.
It would have resonated deeply with their worldview.
Okay, let's talk about another theme that's kind of hard to ignore. Violence.
Yeah, it's everywhere in the play.
It's like this underlying current that keeps getting stronger and stronger, and then it explodes.
It's a reflection of the hatred between the families.
And it starts right away with that street fight, right? That
Yeah.
sets the tone. Like, violence is just part of life in Verona.
It establishes this dangerous, volatile atmosphere.
And it escalates throughout the play, mirroring the growing conflict and the desperation of Romeo and Juliet.
It's like a spiral downward.
So we've already talked about that opening brawl.
Mm.
But then there's Tybalt. He's all about revenge. He says, to strike him dead, I hold it not a sin.
He sees it as his duty to avenge his family's honor.
And Romeo, after Mercutio dies, he says, "This day's black fate on more days doth depend. This but begins the woe, others must end." He's basically saying this isn't over, there's going to be more bloodshed.
He's trapped in the cycle of violence.
And then, of course, the climax of the play, the tomb scene, it's heartbreaking and horrifying.
It's the culmination of all the violence that came before it.
And it shows how destructive these passions can be, even love. I mean, Romeo kills Tybalt because of his love for Mercutio.
It's a twisted kind of love, but it still drives him to violence.
And Friar Lawrence, he warns them, these violent delights have violent ends.
He sees the connection between their intense love and the potential for destruction.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, be careful, this passion could turn on you. And the play does make you think, right? Is it kind of glamorizing violence? I mean, it's so connected to this great love story.
It's a valid question. Does the romanticism of the story overshadow the brutality of the violence?
But some people see it differently. They say it's more like a critique of, this whole honor and revenge culture.
It shows the destructive consequences of those values.
And again, we have to remember that violence was just like more normal back then.
It was a part of everyday life.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about honor and duty.
Yeah.
They might not be like front and center, but they definitely play a big role.
They're the undercurrents that shape a lot of the action.
Especially with Tybalt. Family honor, it's everything to him. It's why he keeps the feud going.
It's why he refuses to compromise.
In Juliet, she feels this huge sense of duty to her family.
She's expected to obey her father no matter what.
And that clashes with her love for Romeo. She's torn between what she's supposed to do and what her heart wants.
It's a classic dilemma.
And we already talked about Mercutio and how he sees Romeo's hesitation to fight as dishonorable.
It shows how much pressure there was to uphold this code of honor.
But Juliet, she questions it all right. She says, what's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. She's saying names, families, they don't really matter. It's the person that counts.
It's a radical idea, especially for that time.
So honor pushes people to do terrible things, like Romeo killing Tybalt. And duty, it traps Juliet. It makes her feel like she has no choices.
And in the end, it's that rigid adherence to honor and duty that leads to tragedy.
Right. It's like they're too stuck in their ways to see any other path.
Yeah.
And you have to wonder, is Shakespeare saying that these values are good or bad?
It's open to interpretation. He shows the good and the bad, the positive and the negative sides of those values.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. Love, conflict, fate, violence, honor, duty.
All intertwined.
And it's amazing how these themes, they're all still relevant today, right? I mean, we still struggle with the same stuff. Love, hate, family, pressure, making choices. It makes you think, how much have we really changed in all these years?
That's the power of Shakespeare. He tacks into something universal.
So I guess the question for all of you listening is, how do you see these themes playing out in your own lives and in the world around you?
It's always a good idea to examine these classic works and see how they reflect our own experiences.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.